Okay, imagine stepping back in time, way, way back, like 8,000, 9,000 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and you're seeing this uh, bustling ancient settlement, not just ruins, but alive.
Right.
We're talking about Çatalhöyük. It's in modern-day Turkey, and it's one of the oldest places people lived continuously. It's kind of mind-blowing.
It really is. And our mission here for this deep dive is really to get a feel for what daily life was actually like there.
Yeah.
And specifically, we want to explore the roles women played, which turned out to be pretty surprising based on some really cutting-edge genetic research.
Okay.
So this isn't just about, dusty bones. It's about understanding the social fabric, the relationships in a society that's incredibly ancient.
Exactly. That's what we want to get into. And our sources, they're from this fascinating study published in Science, big deal journal.
Oh, yeah?
It was this huge international team researchers from Turkey, Denmark, Sweden, the U.S., including Dr. Eva Rosenstock. She's from the Bonn Center for Archaeosciences. So we're going to unpack what they found, give you, a shortcut to understanding Neolithic social structures.
That's great.
Okay, so let's picture this place, Çatalhöyük. The layout itself was really unique.
Yeah, it wasn't like cities today.
No. Imagine these mud brick houses all packed super close together, almost like a honeycomb.
Right up against each other. No streets, really.
Exactly. And people were pretty self-sufficient, farming, raising animals, living very closely with each other and their environment.
And it's historically so significant. It's called the leading site for finds dating from the pottery Neolithic in Anatolia.
Okay, pottery Neolithic. So that means they were making clay pots and stuff.
Yeah, sophisticated pottery, maybe 8,000 to 7,000 years ago. And it wasn't isolated either.
Yeah.
It was on this key route. Neolithic tech ideas, they spread from Western Asia into Europe, and Çatalhöyük was right there on the path. A real hub.
A hub. Wow. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit strange for us today. How they dealt with their dead.
Yeah, the burials are famous.
They didn't have separate cemeteries like we think of. They often buried people right under the floors.
Under the floors of the houses they lived in, literally.
Yeah.
And it gets even more layered because the houses themselves,
Right.
they built new ones directly on top of the old ones, using the old walls as foundations.
So the sediment just grew upwards, like a mound.
Exactly. These mounds built up over centuries. It created this incredible physical culture of remembrance. You were literally living on top of your ancestors,
Wow.
including, their skeletons beneath the floor.
Okay, that's intense. But that led to a puzzle, didn't it, for archaeologists?
It did, a big one, because early studies looking at the bones, the skeletal traits,
Yeah.
they suggested that people buried in the same house often weren't closely related biologically.
Wait, really? Not family?
Not close biological family, generally. Meanwhile, people who did share genetic similarities were found kind of scattered across the whole settlement.
Huh. So that messes with the idea of a household being just, mom, dad, kids.
Totally. For decades, it made archaeologists wonder, what defined a household then? Was it social ties? Economic? Not just blood relations?
So that was the big question, hanging over Çatalhöyük for years.
Yeah.
How did they finally start to, get some answers?
Well, the breakthrough really came with modern ancient DNA analysis, these new studies.
Okay.
The team managed to analyze genetic material from, I think it was 131 different individuals buried there.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And the way they got the DNA was key. For a long time, teeth were considered the best source.
Right.
But now there's this bone, the petrous bone. It's part of the inner ear structure.
Citra's never heard of it.
It's the densest bone in the human body. And it turns out it preserves ancient DNA much, much better than teeth, especially in tough conditions.
Like the dry climate there.
Exactly. That dry continental climate makes preservation tricky, but the petrous bone held onto the genetic information really well. It was a game changer for this kind of research.
Incredible. So this tiny, dense bone unlocks all these secrets. How did Dr. Rosenstock and her team use this? How did it help solve that household puzzle?
Well, her team's work was super important. They excavated on the West Mound between 2006 and 2013.
Okay, the West Mound. Is that different from the main part?
It's slightly later than the main East Mound, but their timelines overlapped, and during their dig, they found 2 infant skeletons.
Newborns.
Yeah, newborns. The only human remains found on the West Mound so far.
Wow.
And they included these infants in the big DNA study. The analysis showed First, the two infants weren't closely related to each other, even though found together.
Okay.
But even more interesting, their DNA profiles matched up with individuals found back on the East Mound.
Ah, so it connects the two areas.
Exactly. It shows this continuity between the mounds, kind of pushes back against earlier ideas that there was maybe a big cultural break between the two periods or areas.
Okay, so they've got all this new, powerful genetic data, especially from these amazing petrous bones. What was the biggest takeaway? The most notable finding?
Right, the big reveal. There was a really clear pattern favoring the maternal lineages.
Maternal, so the mother's side.
Yes. Specifically, the study found that people buried within the same house, under the same floor,
Yeah.
they were more closely related along the female line than the male line.
Whoa. Okay, hold on. So people in the same house shared female relatives more often than male relatives.
That's what the genetics strongly indicate.
That turns a lot of assumptions upside down, doesn't it? About, patriarchal societies being the norm.
It certainly challenges simplistic views. It suggests, as Dr. Rosenstock put it, that women were more important as far as forming households went.
More important forming households.
Okay.
But she also adds a nuance, right? She says it's not quite a matriarchate.
Exactly. That's a crucial distinction.
So what does that mean practically? Like women were central to the home, but maybe not, like the chiefs or rulers.
That seems to be the interpretation. They call it matriarchy at the household level.
Matriarchy.
Yeah.
Meaning women might stay in their birth home and maybe their partners move in?
That's one possibility, yeah. Or that kinship and belonging within that specific house structure flowed more strongly through the female line. But yeah, it doesn't automatically equal women holding all the formal power in the broader community sense. A matriarchate implies wider political or social control.
Okay.
This is more focused on the domestic sphere, the household unit. But,
Yeah.
and this is important, where people live, who forms the core of the home, can absolutely relate to power dynamics.
Right. So it definitely points to women having a really significant, maybe foundational role in the home and family continuity.
A central role, for sure. It reshapes how we have to think about the basic building blocks of that society.
Well, this reminds me. Weren't there older ideas about this? Like even way back? People speculating about prehistoric matriarchy.
Oh, definitely. The idea goes way back even to ancient times. And it got revisited a lot.
And didn't the first guy who dug at Çatalhöyük, James Mellart, didn't he suspect something like this decades ago?
He absolutely did, long before DNA testing was even imaginable.
What made him think that?
Well, it was based on what he found archaeologically. Lots of female figurines, for example, very famous ones.
Those figurines, yeah.
And he also noted that burials identified as female often seem to have richer grave goods with them, more elaborate stuff.
Interesting. So he interpreted that as maybe higher status.
He suspected it might indicate higher status or at least a very central, important role for women in that society.
And now, fast forward decades, you have new digs, new material, and this incredible science.
Exactly. State-of-the-art methods.
And it's like science is catching up to some of those earlier intuitions, but putting hard data behind them.
That's a great way to put it. It's validating some of those early ideas with concrete genetic evidence. Science building on itself.
It's really amazing.
It is. And this whole deep dive into Çatalhöyük, it just gives us such a fantastic window into how complex early human societies could be.
Yeah.
And how adaptable. It really pushes back against any simple one-size-fits-all idea of what family or power meant back then. You see this fascinating mix of biology and culture shaping life in one of the world's first large settlements. It shows there wasn't just one way to organize society.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How these scientific methods let us see such intimate details of life thousands of years ago. Things we could never have known otherwise.
Absolutely.
And it just keeps changing our picture of human history, often in really surprising ways.
It does. And, thinking about Çatalhöyük and this matrilineal focus, it raises bigger questions too, doesn't it? Questions that go beyond this one site.
Like what?
Well, like when and why did things shift? Why did the role of men and patrilineal kinship seem to become more dominant, especially as the Neolithic spread into Europe?
Good question.
And what happened next in Western Asia itself? What were the next steps in how societies organized?
Right. It makes you think about the whole long, complex journey of human societies.
Exactly. It encourages you to consider that long arc, the different paths people took. It wasn't just a straight line from A to B. There were all these diverse ways of living and organizing communities throughout history, something to really mull over.